Good morning from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. The time is 10:53 a.m. and this is my second attempt to make this video because I was 3 pages in when I realised I hadn't pressed the record button. We weren't filming. Oh, I'm so annoyed with myself, but I'm also greatly amused. It's another beautiful day in Sacred Space, Titania's Realm, but we're getting little showers of rain starting up. So I thought about quitting while I was ahead, and then I decided, no, it's only water, much needed water from the heavens, and the Mama T, the Tanya, the Psychedelic Dreamer, Miss Five, all my little alter egos must soldier on with this mission. So we were reading the next part 2 of The Love of a Good Woman by Alice Munro from her new selected stories. And now I feel kind of silly because I have to rinse and repeat, people of Earth. So I was doing so well too. Oh, anyway, we'll begin again. Well, I will begin again, and you, my blessed YouTube audience, subscribers, likers and commenters, will just happily come along for the ride since you come to my channel to listen to these stories. They realised then that they had to dump the flowers at once, so they simply threw the branches under a parked car. They brushed a few stray petals off their clothes as they turned into the square. Saturdays were still important then. They brought the country people into town. Cars were already parked around the square and on the side streets. Big country boys and girls and smaller children from the town and the country were heading for the movie matinee. It was necessary to pass Honeckers in the first block, and there in full view in one of the windows, Jimmy saw his mother. Back at work already, she was putting her hat straight on a female dummy, adjusting the veil, then fiddling with the shoulders of the dress. She was a short woman and she had to stand on tiptoe to do this properly. She had taken off her shoes to walk on the window carpet. You could see the rosy, plump cushions of her heels through her stockings, and when she stretched, you saw the back of her knee through the slit in her skirt. Above that was a wide but shapely behind, and the line of her panties or girdle. Jimmy could hear in his mind the little grunts she would be making. Also, he could smell the stockings that she sometimes took off as soon as she got home to save them from runs. Stockings and underwear, even clean female underwear, had a faint, private smell that was both appealing and disgusting. He hoped 2 things: that the others hadn't noticed her. They had, but the idea of a mother dressed up every day and out in the public world of town was so strange to them that they couldn't comment, could only dismiss it. And that she would not, please not, turn around and spot him. She was capable, if she did that, of rapping on the glass and mouthing. At work she lost the hushed discretion, the studied gentleness of home. Her obligingness turned from meek to pert. He used to be delighted by this other side of her, this friskiness, just as he was by Honecker's with its extensive counters of glass and varnished wood, its big mirrors at the top of the staircase, in which he could see himself climbing up to ladies' wear on the second floor. "Here's my young mischief," his mother would say, and sometimes slip him a dime. He could never stay more than a minute. Mr. or Mrs. Honecker might be watching. Young mischief. Words that were once as pleasant to hear as the tinkle of dimes and nickels had now turned slyly shaming. They were safely past. In the next block they had to pass the Duke of Cumberland, but Cece had no worries. If his father had not come home at dinner time, it meant he would be in there for hours yet. But the word Cumberland always fell across his mind heavily. From the days when he hadn't even known what it meant, he got a sense of sorrowful plummeting, a weight hitting dark water far down. Bye-bye. You whistling to somebody? The birdie's here. Yes, the tawnies are up in the tree. Well, I can see it. I can see one tawny today. Between the Cumberland and the town hall was an unpaved alley, and at the back of the town hall was the police office. They turned into this alley, and soon a lot of new noise reached them, opposing the street noise. It was not from the Cumberland. The noise in there was all muffled up, the bare parlour having only small, high windows like a public toilet. It was coming from the police office. The door to their office was open on account of the mild weather, and even out in the alley you could smell the pipe tobacco and cigars. It wasn't just the policemen who sat in there, especially on Saturday afternoons, with the stove going in winter and the fan in summer, and the door open to let in the pleasant air on an in-between day like today. Colonel Box would be there. In fact, they could already hear the wheeze he made, the long drawn-out after effects of his asthmatic laughter. He was a relative of Jimmy's, but there was a coolness in the family because he did not approve of Jimmy's father's marriage. He spoke to Jimmy when he recognised him in a surprised, ironic tone of voice. "If he ever offers you a quarter or anything, you say you don't need it," Jimmy's mother had told him. But Colonel Box had never made such an offer. Also, Mr. Pollock would be there, who had retired from the drugstore, and Fergus Solly, who was not a half-wit but looked like one because he had been gassed in the First World War. All day these men and others played cards, smoked, told stories and drank coffee at the town's expense, as Bud's father said. Anybody wanting to make a complaint or a report had to do it within sight of them and probably within earshot. Run the gauntlet. They came almost to a stop outside the open door. Nobody had noticed them. Colonel Box said, "I'm not dead yet," repeating the final line of some story. They began to walk past slowly with their heads down, kicking at the gravel. Round the corner of the building they picked up speed. By the entry to the men's public toilet there was a recent streak of lumpy vomit on the wall and a couple of empty bottles on the gravel. They had to walk between the refuse bins and the high, watchful windows of the town clerk's office. And then they were off the gravel, back on the square. "I got money," Cece said. This matter-of-fact announcement brought them all relief. Cece jingled change in his pocket. It was the money his mother had given him after he washed up the dishes when he went into the front room to tell her he was going out. "Help yourself to 50 cents off the dresser," she had said. Sometimes she had money, though he never saw his father give her any. And whenever she said, "Help yourself," or gave him a few coins, Cece understood that she was ashamed of their life, ashamed for him and in front of him. These were the times when he hated the sight of her, although he was glad of the money, especially if she said that he was a good boy and he was not to think she wasn't grateful for all he did. They took the street that led down to the harbour. At the side of the Paquette's service station, there was a booth from which Mrs. Paquette sold. Sounds like packet, doesn't it? Probably is. Anyway, I'll give it the slightly French interpretation. Who wants to be called packet? Oh, the God. Did you whack it in the packet? I shouldn't make fun of someone's name, should I? It's not nice. Be good, Mama G. All right. Let's start from the top. At the side of Paquette's service station, there was a booth from which Mrs. Paquette... I'm thinking of that TV show, Mrs. Bucket, but everyone called her Mrs. Bouquet. We'll throw it in the bucket, shall we? There was a booth from which Mrs. Paquette sold hot dogs, ice cream, candy, and cigarettes. She had refused to sell them cigarettes even when Jimmy said they were for his Uncle Fred. But she didn't hold it against them that they'd tried. She was a fat, pretty woman, a French Canadian. They bought some licorice whips, black and red. They meant to buy some ice cream later when they weren't so full from dinner. They went over to where there were 2 old cars set up by the fence under a tree that gave shade in summer. They shared out the licorice whips. I'm smiling because I used to like to get red licorice strips, or what they call whips, after dancing for hours at the casino, at the live wire bar at the Treasury Casino. I used to walk across the road up a bit to the 7-Eleven, and I'd buy a dozen red licorice strips, and I would just devour them happily. And one night there were these homeless men begging for money, and I said, "I don't have any money." And I was annoyed. I was really annoyed that night. I'd had a very spiritual, very fraught night with various distressing events. I wrote a story about it actually. And but anyway, I came out from buying my licorice strips, and I shared them all out with the homeless men, and they sat there very meekly accepting their gifts like meek little schoolboys, and it was actually really delightful. It's like I used to do sweet things like that. So sometimes if I had spare money, I'd give them some money, but not a lot, $5 or $10, depending if I had something. Invariably, I was more broke than they were, panhandling out in the streets. But we used to joke about it, my homeless friend Katrina and I. Sometimes she'd shout me a coffee. It was really quite a strange alternate reality, but I was out there on the weekends dancing as fast and as hard as I possibly could, hoping to meet my true loved one, and that never manifested. So at the end of the night I'd be exhausted and frankly a bit depressed from all the shit show of horror and ghastly, vile, often obnoxious men. It was really vile some nights. And so sometimes hanging out with the homeless community was more fun than dancing in that dance space, ironically. I'd sometimes sit out with Katrina till I'd come out around about 2 in the morning, and I'd sometimes sit out with her till 4 or 5 a.m. and then I'd take myself off home. I miss her sometimes. She was always very kind to me. There were times when she'd be in some kind of blackout drunk state where I wouldn't engage with her because, she wasn't well. But when she was bright and sprightly and synapsing, I'd sit and chat to her. Sometimes not for very long. Other times, like I say, for a few hours. And in a way, it was a comfort to us both. She used to call me her angel, which was sweet, really. I'm nobody's angel. Certainly no angel. Anyway, Captain Turvitt was sitting on the other seat. Captain Turvitt had been a real captain for many years on the lake boats. Now he had a job as a special constable. He stopped the cars to let the children cross the street in front of the school and kept them from sledding down the side street in winter. He blew his whistle and held up one big hand, which looked like a clown's hand, in a white glove. He was still tall and straight and broad-shouldered, although old and white-haired. The cars would do what he said, and children too. At night he went around checking the doors of all the stores, to see that they were locked and to make sure that there was nobody inside committing a burglary. During the day, he often slept in public. When the weather was bad, he slept in the library. When it was good, he chose some seat out of doors. He didn't spend much time in the police office, probably because he was too deaf to follow the conversation without his hearing aid in, and like many deaf people, he hated his hearing aid. And he was used to being solitary, surely, staring out over the bow of the lake boats. His eyes were closed and his head tilted back so that he could get the sun in his face. When they went over to talk to him, and the decision to do this was made without any consultation beyond one resigned and dubious look, they had to wake him from his doze. His face took a moment to register where and when and who. Then he took a large old-fashioned watch out of his pocket, as if he counted on children always wanting to be told the time. But they went on talking to him, with their expressions agitated and slightly shamed. They were saying, "Mr. Willens is out in Yotland Pond, and we seen the car, and drowned." He had to hold up his hand and make shushing motions, while the other hand went rooting around in his pants pocket and came up with his hearing aid. He nodded his head seriously, encouragingly, as if to say, "Patience, patience," while he got the device settled in his ear. Then both hands up, be still, while he was testing. Finally, another nod of a brisker sort, and in a stern voice, but making the joke to some extent of his sternness, he said, "Proceed." Cece, who was the quietest of the three, as Jimmy was the politest and Bud the mouthiest, was the one who turned everything around. "Your fly's undone," he said. Then they all hooped and ran away. The elation did not vanish right away, but it was not something that could be shared or spoken about. They had to pull apart. Cece went home to work on his hideaway. The cardboard floor, which had been frozen through the winter, was sodden now and needed to be replaced. Jimmy climbed into the loft of the garage where he had recently discovered a box of old Doc Savage magazines that had once belonged to his Uncle Fred. Bud went home and found nobody there but his mother, who was waxing the dining room floor. He looked at comic books for an hour or so, and then he told her. He believed that his mother had no experience or authority outside their house, and that she would not make up her mind about what to do until she had phoned his father. To his surprise, she immediately phoned the police. Then she phoned his father, and somebody went to round up Cece and Jimmy. A police car drove into Yotland from the township road, and all was confirmed. A policeman and the Anglican minister went to see Mrs. Willens. "I didn't want to bother you," Mrs. Willens was reported to have said. "I was going to give him till dark." She told them that Mr. Willens had driven out to the country yesterday afternoon to take some drops to an old blind man. Sometimes he got held up, she said. He visited people, or the car got stuck. "Was he downhearted or anything like that?" the policeman asked her. "Oh, surely not," the minister said. "He was the bulwark of the choir." "The word was not in his vocabulary," said Mrs. Willens. Something was made of the boys sitting down and eating their dinners and never saying a word, and then buying a bunch of licorice whips. A new nickname, Dead Man, was found and settled on each of them. Jimmy and Bud bore it till they left town, and Cece, who married young and went to work in the elevator, saw it passed on to his two sons. By that time, nobody thought of what it referred to. The insult to Captain Turvitt remained a secret. Each of them expected some reminder, some lofty look of injury or judgment. The next time they had to pass under his uplifted arm, crossing the street to the school. But he held up his gloved hand, his noble and clownish right hand, with his usual benevolent composure. He gave consent. "Proceed." Chapter 2. Heart Failure. Glomerulonephritis, Enid wrote in her notebook. It was the first case that she had ever seen. The fact was that Mrs. Quinn's kidneys were failing and nothing could be done about it. Her kidneys were drying up and turning into hard and useless granular lumps. Her urine at present was scanty and had a smoky look, and the smell that came out on her breath and through her skin was acrid and ominous. And there was another fainter smell, like rotted fruit, that seemed to Enid related to the pale lavender-brown stains appearing on her body. Her legs twitched in spasms of sudden pain, and her skin was subject to a violent itching, so that Enid had to rub her with ice. She wrapped the ice in towels and pressed the packs to the spots in torment. "How do you contract that kind of a disease anyhow?" said Mrs. Quinn's sister-in-law. Her name was Mrs. Green, Olive Green. It never occurred to her how that would sound, she said, until she got married, and all of a sudden everybody was laughing at it. She lived on a farm a few miles away, out on the highway, and every few days she came and I'm laughing because my Hebrew name, because I'm a convert, was and is Ruth bat Avraham v'Sarah, Ruth, daughter of Abraham and Sarah. But after one of my close shaves with death or near death, it's customary to change your name. So I changed my name to Ruth Tanya bat Avraham v'Sarah, naming myself after the Chabad tome that is actually a misogynistic tome, ironically. But anyway, I reclaimed my first name as a Hebrew name. And when it was announced in my congregation, I hadn't really thought about it either that much. So when they read out that my new name was Ruth Tanya but Avraham v'Sarah, all the teenage boys and a few of the adult men burst out laughing. Ruth Tanya. I just stared at them. I thought, oh, you all would have loved to have had a go, wouldn't you, boys? So I just stared at them politely and smiled. I thought, oh well, Tanya was well rooted by that phase of life anyway, and well over and done with, and yet here I am all these years later, still Ruth Tanya, still rooted, but celibate for the past, what is it now? 11 years. I gave up on trying to have sexual relationships with men because all of them had either turned homicidal or vicious or sadistic or cruel, or were just lackluster lost boys that couldn't make up their mind. And I just couldn't be bothered anymore. Just was over it. And then when it flared up again, I fell in love the last time. Another game player. So it is what it is, people of Earth. But at least I didn't actually get into a sexual relationship and cause further fucking psychic damage to myself. So there is that. Anyway, and I must admit, I was a bit disappointed because I was hoping to re-innovate my sexual life again after so many years, but I promised myself that I wouldn't lie with a man unless he was a man who truly, deeply, honouringly, absolutely adored me, because I'm tired of being used and abused by creatures that aren't worth a black under my fingernail. Right, here we go, babies. But yeah, I had to kind of have a chuckle about how a name can cause a bit of othering and hilarity. What's in a name anyway? It's an energy signature. Ruth Tanya reclaimed her power in reclaiming my name, and it's been a long, hard, arduous, empowering journey ever since. She lived on a farm a few miles away, out on the highway, and every few days she took the children's washing as well, brought everything back freshly ironed and folded. She even ironed the ribbons on the night dresses. Enid was grateful to her. She had been on jobs where she had to do the laundry herself, or worse still, load it onto her mother, who would pay to have it done in town. Not wanting to offend, but seeing which way the questions were tending, she said, "It's hard to tell." "Because you hear one thing and another," Mrs. Green said. "You hear that sometimes a woman might take some pills. They get these pills to take for when their period is late, or if they take them just like the doctor says, for a good purpose, that's fine. But if they take too many, and for a bad purpose, their kidneys are wrecked. Am I right?" Well, the weather's about to get a little wild, people of Earth. "I've never come in contact with a case like that," Enid said. Mrs. Green was a tall, stout woman, like her brother Rupert, who was Mrs. Quinn's husband. She had a round, snub-nosed, agreeably wrinkled face, the kind that Enid's mother called potato Irish. But behind Rupert's good-humoured expression, there was wariness and withholding, and behind Mrs. Green's, there was yearning. Enid did not know for what. For the simplest conversation, Mrs. Green brought a huge demand. Maybe it was just a yearning for news of something momentous, an event. Of course, an event was coming, something momentous, at least in this family. Mrs. Quinn was going to die at the age of 27. That was the age she gave herself. Enid would have put some years on it, but once an illness had progressed, this far age was hard to guess. When her kidneys stopped working altogether, her heart would give out and she would die. The doctor had said to Enid, "This will take you into the summer, but the chances are you'll get some kind of a holiday before the hot weather's over." Rupert met her when he went up north, Mrs. Green said. He went off by himself. He worked in the bush up there. She had some kind of a job in a hotel. I'm not sure what. Chambermaid job. She wasn't raised up there though. She says she was raised in an orphanage in Montreal. She can't help that. You'd expect her to speak French, but if she does, she don't let on. Enid said, "An interesting life." "You can say that again." "An interesting life," said Enid. Sometimes she couldn't help it. She tried a joke where it had hardly a hope of working. She raised her eyebrows encouragingly, and Mrs. Green did smile. But was she hurt? That was just the way Rupert would smile in high school, warding off some possible mockery. "He never had any kind of a girlfriend before that," said Mrs. Green. Enid had been in the same class as Rupert, though she did not mention that to Mrs. Green. She felt some embarrassment now, because he was one of the boys, in fact the main one, that she and her girlfriends had teased and tormented. Picked on, as they used to say. They had picked on Rupert, following him up the street, calling out, "Hello, Rupert! Hello, Rupert!" putting him into a state of agony watching his neck go red. "Rupert's got scarlet fever," they would say. "Rupert, you should be quarantined." And they would pretend that one of them, Enid, Joan McAuliffe, Marion Denny, had a case on him. "She wants to speak to you, Rupert. Why don't you ever ask her out? You could phone her up at least. She's dying to talk to you." They did not really expect him to respond to these pleading overtures, and what joy if he had. He would have been rejected in short order and the school story broadcast all over the school. Why? Why did they treat him this way? It's quite lovely, the black clouds behind my head, like a halo of grey. Grey's not my favourite colour, but I've reached my crondom and I've embraced my impending greyness. Just got to grow all the blonde foils out and reclaim my natural state, people of Earth. I'm reclaiming my natural state in preparation for the next phase of life. Descent into death, or a recreation of my power and glory as an older woman. Whatever the gods decide. A little bit what I might decide too is that I'm a stubborn old wench. Too many motherfuckers have tried to kill me for me to give up now, but you know, the toothy agonies was very, very painful and grinding, but I notice today it's swelling's going a bit down. Still that bit of fleshiness there, but then it's a bit fleshy on that side too, so that might be just my face. But yes, it's still a little bit there, but not too shabby. I do feel very tired though. I was quite unwell yesterday, so I'm still fighting forwards every day in every way. The black clouds change to a kind of almost a teal colour, isn't it? Oh well. If the gods want me to carry on with the story, they'll hold the rain off long enough for me to complete this task. Not that I don't want it to rain, I very much do, but just it can rain soonish, but not right now. Can I control the weather? Sometimes. Shh, don't tell anyone. They'll all want some. But yes, it's sort of circling around and moving on, so come back a bit later though. We want rain for the garden. Getting a few little droplets now, boys. Yes. They did not really expect him to respond to these pleading overtures. I didn't get my wish, did I? It's going to bucket down now. It really isn't a lot of black clouds, so it'll pass. But what joy if he had. He would have been rejected in short order and the story broadcast all over the school. Why? Why did they treat him this way? Long to humiliate him, simply because they could. Impossible that he would have forgotten. But he treated Enid as if she were a new acquaintance, his wife's nurse, coming to his house from anywhere at all. And Enid took her cue from him. Things had been unusually well arranged here to spare her extra work. Rupert slept at Mrs. Green's house and ate his meals there. The two little girls could have been there as well, but it would have meant putting them into another school. There was nearly a month to go before school was out for the summer. Rupert came into the house in the evening and spoke to his children. "Are you being good girls?" he said. "Show Daddy what you made with your blocks," said Enid. "Show Daddy your pictures in the colouring book. I tell you what, I wouldn't want some asshole that had bullied me in charge of my children. Fucking little psychopaths never change." He's a very tolerant man, Mr. Rupert is. She would have come for the job with me. I would have said, "Get the fuck off my front door and never darken it again." Got a long memory for assholes. Based on the fact that they usually don't change. The blocks, the crayons, the colouring books were all provided by Enid. She had phoned her mother and asked her to see what things she could find in the old trunks. Her mother had done that and brought along as well an old book of cut-out dolls which she had collected from someone. Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret Rose and their many outfits. Enid hadn't been able to get the little girls to say thank you until she put these things on a high shelf and announced that they would stay there till thank you was said. Lois and Sylvie were 7 and 6 years old and as wild as little barn cats. Rupert didn't ask where the playthings came from. He told his daughters to be good girls and asked Enid if there was anything she needed from town. Once she told him that she had replaced the light bulb in the cellarway and that he could get her some spare bulbs. "I could have done that," he said. "I don't have any trouble with light bulbs," said Enid, "or fuses, or knocking in nails. My mother and I have done without a man around the house for a long time now." She meant to tease a little, to be friendly, but it didn't work. Finally, Rupert would ask about his wife, and Enid would say that her blood pressure was down slightly, or that she had eaten and kept down part of an omelette for supper, or that the ice pack seemed to ease her itchy skin and she was sleeping better. And Rupert would say that if she was sleeping, he'd better not go in. Enid said, "Nonsense! To see her husband would do a woman more good than to have a little doze." She took the children up to bed then to give man and wife a time of privacy. But Rupert never stayed more than a few minutes, and when Enid came back downstairs and went into the front room, now the sick room, to ready the patient for the night, Mrs. Quinn would be lying back against the pillows, looking agitated but not dissatisfied. "Doesn't hang around here very long, does he?" Mrs. Quinn would say. Makes me laugh. "How are you?" Off we go. Why don't we take her out and throw her on the manure pile? Why don't we just dump her out like a dead cat? That's what he's thinking, isn't he? "I doubt it," said Enid, bringing the basin and towels, the rubbing alcohol and the baby powder. "I doubt it," said Mrs. Quinn, quite viciously. But she submitted readily enough to having her nightgown removed, her hair smoothed back from her face, a towel slid under her hips. Enid was used to people making a fuss about being naked, even when they were very old or very ill. Sometimes she would have to tease them or badger them into common sense. "Do you think I haven't seen any bottom parts before?" she would say. "Bottom parts, top parts. It's pretty boring after a while. You know, there's just the two ways we're made." But Mrs. Quinn was without shame, opening her legs and raising herself a bit to make the job easier. She was a little bird-boned woman, queerly shaped now, with her swollen abdomen and limbs, and her breasts shrunk to tiny pouches with dried currant nipples. Swole up like some kind of pig, Mrs. Quinn said, except for my tits, and they always were kind of useless. I never had no big udders on me like you. Don't you get sick of the sight of me? Won't you be glad when I'm dead? If I felt like that, I wouldn't be here, said Enid. Good riddance to bad rubbish, said Mrs. Quinn. That's what you'll all say. Good riddance to bad rubbish. I'm no use to him any more, am I? I'm no use to any man. He goes out of here every night, and he goes to pick up women, doesn't he? As far as I know, he goes to his sister's house. As far as you know, but you don't know much. Enid thought she knew what this meant, the spite and venom, the energy saved for ranting. Mrs. Quinn was flailing about for an enemy. Sick people grew to resent well people, and sometimes that was true of husbands and wives, or even of mothers and their children. Both husband and children in Mrs. Quinn's case. On a Saturday morning, Enid called Lois and Sylvie from their games under the porch to come and see their mother looking pretty. Mrs. Quinn had just had her morning wash and was in a clean nightgown with her fine, sparse, fair hair brushed and held back by a blue ribbon. Enid took a supply of these ribbons with her when she went to nurse a female patient. Also a bottle of cologne and a cake of scented soap. Well, that's a kind touch, isn't it? Maybe I should change my mind about her still growing up to be a bully and an asshole. Sometimes some people change. Depends on the person, though, and the circumstances. Maybe she became a nurse to atone for her multifarious sins. Maybe. But I've met some pretty sadistic evil nurses in my day, so there is that. Little Kermie boy. You're all right, Kermie. He's getting agitated. She did look pretty, or you could see at least that she had once been pretty, with her wide forehead and cheekbones. They almost punched the skin now, like china doorknobs, and her large greenish eyes and childish translucent teeth, and a small, stubborn chin. The children came into the room obediently, if unenthusiastically. Mrs. Quinn said, "Keep them off of my bed, they're filthy." "They just want to see you," said Enid. "Well, now they've seen me," said Mrs. Quinn, "and now they can go." This behaviour didn't seem to surprise or disappoint the children. They looked at Enid, and Enid said, "All right now, your mother better have a rest." And they ran out and slammed the kitchen door. "Can't you get them to quit doing that?" Mrs. Quinn said. "Every time they do it, it's like a brick hits me in my chest." You would think these two daughters of hers were a pair of rowdy orphans wished on her for an indefinite visit. But that was the way some people were before they settled down to their dying, sometimes even up to the event itself. People of a gentler nature, it would seem, than Mrs. Quinn might say that they knew how much their brothers, sisters, husbands, wives and children had always hated them, how much of a disappointment they had been to others and others had been to them, and how glad they knew everybody would be to see them gone. They might say this at the end of peaceful, useful lives in the midst of loving families where there was no explanation at all for such fits. And usually the fits passed. But often too, in the last weeks or even days of life, there was mulling over of old feuds and slights, or whimpering about some unjust punishment suffered 70 years earlier. Once a woman had asked Enid to bring her a willow platter from the cupboard, and Enid had thought that she wanted the comfort of looking at this one pretty possession for the last time. But it turned out that she wanted to use her last surprising strength to smash it against the bedpost. Now I know my sister's never going to get her hands on that, she said. And often people remarked that their visitors were only coming to gloat, and that the doctor was responsible for their sufferings. They detested the sight of Enid herself for her sleepless strength and patient hands, and the way the juices of life were so admirably balanced and flowing in her. Enid was used to that, and she was able to understand the trouble they were in, the trouble of dying, and also the trouble of their lives that sometimes overshadowed that. But with Mrs. Quinn, she was at a loss. It was not just that she couldn't supply comfort here, it was that she couldn't want to. She could not conquer her dislike of this doomed, miserable young woman. She disliked this body that she had to wash and powder and placate with ice and alcohol rubs. She understood now what people meant when they said that they hated sickness and sick bodies. She understood the women who had said it to her. I don't know how you do it. I could never be a nurse. It's the one thing I could never be. She disliked this particular body, all the particular signs of its disease. The smell of it and the discoloration, the malignant-looking little nipples, and the pathetic ferret-like teeth. She saw all this as the sign of a willed corruption. She was as bad as Mrs. Green, sniffing out a rampant impurity. In spite of being a nurse who knew better, and in spite of its being her job, and surely her nature, to be compassionate, she didn't know why this was happening. Mrs. Quinn reminded her somewhat of girls she had known in high school, cheaply dressed, sickly-looking girls with dreary futures who still displayed a hard-faced satisfaction with themselves. They lasted only a year or two. They got pregnant. Most of them got married. Enid had nursed some of them in later years in home childbirth and found their confidence exhausted and their bold streak turned into meekness or even piety. she was sorry for them, even when she remembered how determined they had been to get what they had got. It is fucking pitiable. Sometimes getting what you want is the worst fucking thing that could happen to a woman. Remember that, people of Earth, particularly younger women that might be hearing this story. If at first you don't succeed, be grateful you dodged a bullet and find the light at the end of the tunnel that isn't a fucking train, and wait for a good, kind man who will love you no matter what, no matter who. In spite of your weird and quirky ways, because we all have some weird and quirky ways. Mama T is an abundance or an emotional overload of them, but that's because of too much evil and awfulness. So be grateful too if you've had a blessed and charmed life. Be grateful, because at the end of the time, our time on this planet, we all die eventually. At least you can look back with some fondness and some sense of humour at some of the relationships in your lives. Blessed be. Mrs. Quinn was a harder case. Mrs. Quinn might crack and crack, but there would be nothing but sullen mischief, nothing but rot inside her. Worse even than the fact that Enid should feel this revulsion was the fact that Mrs. Quinn knew it. No patience or gentleness or cheerfulness that Enid could summon would keep Mrs. Quinn from knowing, and Mrs. Quinn made knowing it her triumph. Good riddance to bad rubbish. When Enid was 20 years old and had almost finished her nurse's training, her father was dying in the Wally hospital. That was when he said to her, "I don't know as I care for this career of yours. I don't want you working in a place like this." Enid bent over him and asked what sort of place he thought he was in. "It's only the Wally hospital," she said. "I know that," said her father, sounding as calm and reasonable as he had always done. He was an insurance and real estate agent. "I know what I'm talking about. Promise me you won't." "Promise you what?" said Enid. "You won't do this kind of work," her father said. Excuse me. She could not get any further explanation out of him. He tightened up his mouth as if her questioning disgusted him. All he would say was, "Promise." "What is all this about?" Enid asked her mother, and her mother said, "Oh, go ahead and promise him. What difference is it going to make?" Enid thought this a shocking thing to say, but made no comment. It was consistent with her mother's way of looking at a lot of things. "I'm not going to promise anything I don't understand," she said. "I'm probably not going to promise anything anyway. But if you know what he's talking about, you ought to tell me." "It's just this idea he's got now," her mother said. "He's got an idea that nursing makes a woman coarse." Enid said, "Coarse?" Her mother said that the part of nursing her father objected to was the familiarity nurses had with men's bodies. Her father thought, he had decided, that such familiarity would change a girl, and furthermore, that it would change the way men thought about that girl. It would spoil her good chances and give her a lot of other chances that were not so good. Some men would lose interest and others would become interested in the wrong way. I suppose it's all mixed up with wanting you to get married, her mother said. Too bad if it is, said Enid. But she ended up promising, and her mother said, well, I hope that makes you happy, not makes him happy, makes you. It seemed that her mother had known before Enid did just how tempting this promise would be. The deathbed promise, the self-denial, the wholesale sacrifice. And the more absurd, the better. And this was what she had given into. And not for love of her father either, her mother implied, but for the thrill of it, sheer, noble perversity. If he'd asked you to give up something you didn't care one way or the other about, you'd probably have told him nothing doing, her mother said. If, for instance, he'd asked you to give up wearing lipstick, you'd still be wearing it. Enid listened to this with a patient expression. Did you pray about it? Said her mother sharply. Enid said yes. She withdrew from nursing school. She stayed at home and kept busy. There was enough money that she did not have to work. In fact, her mother had not wanted Enid to go into nursing in the first place, claiming that it was something poor girls did. It was a way out for girls whose parents couldn't keep them or send them to college. Enid did not remind her of this inconsistency. She painted a fence, she tied up the rose bushes for winter. She learned to bake, and she learned to play bridge, taking her father's place in the weekly games her mother played with Mr. and Mrs. Willens from next door. In no time at all she became, as Mr. Willens said, a scandalously good player. He took to turning up with chocolates and a pink rose for her to make up for his own inadequacies as a partner. She went skating in the winter evenings. She played badminton. She had never lacked friends, and she didn't now. Most of the people who had been in the last year of high school with her were finishing college now, or were already working at a distance as teachers or nurses or chartered accountants. But she made friends with others who had dropped out before senior year to work in banks or stores or offices, to become plumbers or milliners. The girls in this group were dropping like flies, as they said of each other. They were dropping into matrimony, which is kind of a fly-blown thing on a fucking dead carcass if you marry the wrong person, people of Earth. Ask me how I fucking know. But we mustn't be bitter. We mustn't, because there are people who are good and kind and loyal and faithful to each other. And those are sometimes a little bit boring, but sustaining marriages. Hopefully not too boring though, because boring leads to mischief, and mischief leads to complete disarray sometimes. It's a slippery slope, isn't it? All of life is just a mystery and a bit of a gamble at times. What did ABBA used to sing? Take a chance on me. Wow. Enid was an organiser of bridal showers and a help at trousseau teas. In a couple of years would come the christenings, where she could expect to be a favourite godmother. Children not related to her would grow up calling her aunt, but she was already a sort of honorary daughter to women of her mother's age and older, the only young woman who had time for the book club and the horticultural society. So quickly and easily, still in her youth, she was slipping into this essential, central, yet isolated role. But in fact, it had been her role all along. In high school, she was always the class secretary or class social convener. She was well-liked and high-spirited and well-dressed and good-looking, but she was slightly set apart. She had friends who were boys, but never a boyfriend. She did not seem to have made a choice this way. She was not worried about it either. She had been preoccupied with her ambition to be a missionary at one embarrassing stage, and then to be a nurse. She had never thought of nursing as just something to do until she got married. Her hope was to be good and do good, and not necessarily in the orderly, customary, wifely way. At New Year's, she went to the dance in the town hall. The man who danced with her most often and escorted her home and pressed her hand good night was the manager of the creamery, a man in his 40s, never married, an excellent dancer and a avuncular friend to girls unlikely to find partners. No woman ever took him seriously. Maybe you should take a business course, her mother said. Or why shouldn't you go to college, where the men might be more appreciative, she was surely thinking. I'm too old, said Enid. Her mother laughed. That only shows how young you are, she said. She seemed relieved to discover that her daughter had a touch of folly natural to her age, that she could think 21 was at a vast difference from 18. I'm not going to troop in with kids out of high school, Enid said. I mean it. What do you want to get rid of me for anyway? I'm fine here. The sulkiness or sharpness also seemed to please and reassure her mother, but after a moment she sighed and said, You'll be surprised how fast the years go by. That August, there were a lot of cases of measles and a few of polio at the same time. The doctor who had looked after Enid's father and had observed her competence around the hospital asked her if she would be willing to help out for a while, nursing people at home. She said that she would think about it. You mean pray, her mother said, and Enid's face took on a stubborn, secretive expression that in another girl's case might have had to do with meeting her boyfriend. That promise, she said to her mother the next day, it was about working in a hospital, wasn't it? Her mother said she had understood it that way, yes. And with graduating and being a registered nurse, yes. So if there were people who needed nursing at home, who couldn't afford to go to the hospital or did not want to go, and if Enid went into their houses to nurse them, not as a registered nurse, but as what they called a practical nurse, she would hardly be breaking her promise, would she? And since most of those needing her care would be children or women having babies or old people dying, there would not be much danger of the coarsening effect, would there? If the only men you get to see are men who are never going to get out of bed again, you have a point, said her mother. But she could not keep from adding that what all this meant was that Enid had decided to give up the possibility of a decent job in a hospital in order to do miserable, back-breaking work and miserable, primitive houses for next to no money. Enid would find herself pumping water from contaminated wells and breaking ice in winter wash basins and battling flies in summer and using an outdoor toilet, scrub boards and coal oil lamps instead of washing machines and electricity, trying to look after sick people in those conditions and cope with housework and poor weaselly children as well. But if that is your object in life, she said, I can see that the worse I make it sound, the more determined you get to do it. The only thing is, I'm going to ask for a couple of promises myself. Promise me you'll boil the water you drink and you won't marry a farmer. Enid said, of all the crazy ideas. That was 16 years ago. During the first of those years, people got poorer and poorer. There were more and more of them who could not afford to go to the hospital, and the houses where Enid worked had often deteriorated almost to the state that her mother had described. Sheets and diapers had to be washed by hand in houses where the washing machine had broken down and could not be repaired, or the electricity had been turned off, or where there had never been any electricity in the first place. Enid did not work without pay because that would not have been fair to the other women who did the same kind of nursing and who did not have the same options as she did. But she gave most of the money back in the form of children's shoes and winter coats and trips to the dentist and Christmas toys. Like my beautiful man, my earth angel, my sweetheart, platonic, who's paying for me to go to the dentist. Truly kind and noble man, even though dentists for me are fraught beyond belief, but, well, that last debacle was heinous, to put it mildly. Her mother went around canvassing her friends for old baby cots and high chairs and blankets and worn-out sheets, which she herself ripped up and hemmed to make diapers. Everybody said how proud she must be of Enid, and she said yes, she surely was. But sometimes it's a devil of a lot of work, she said, this being the mother of a saint. But then came the war and the great shortage of doctors and nurses, and Enid was more welcome than ever, as she was for a while after the war with so many babies being born. It was only now, with the hospitals being enlarged and many farms getting prosperous, that it looked as if her responsibilities might dwindle away to the care of those who had bizarre and hopeless afflictions. All were so irredeemably cranky that hospitals had thrown them out. Right, on that note, I'm feeling a bit triggered and I'm tired. Goddess bless all of us, even we cranky, highly intelligent, highly sensitive, highly discerning, wise ones, well hated for our ability to see clearly through the epic, draconian, fascist bullshit. Going to enjoy my rest of my time in the garden, make another cup of tea, make something to eat, getting a bit peckish. And look at the beautiful sky behind me. It's cerulean blue after it went black and grey and teal. It's interesting watching the changes of colours behind my head, almost like a halo. The way I'm sitting, it's almost like the trees are curving to embrace me. Helps to have a good imagination and a sense of the mystical amidst the mundane at Titania's realm. So have a beautiful day, people of Earth. Be kind, be noble, be honouring, be compassionate. If you can't be compassionate and kind, get another kind of job. And don't be sadistic to people who come in great pain and torment. And wow, maybe if I did that kind of work day in, day out, I'd learn to be coarse and sadistic and cruel too, but it's actually not okay. None of it is okay. Anyway, blessed be, again, from sacred space. It's just another day in the space-time continuum, spinning in infinity. And let us say, hallelujah.